I hope a helpful word on the Epistle to the Hebrews, or in the English Standard Version of the Bible, the letter to the Hebrews. If you are somebody who reads and regularly looks at the King James Bible, the King James says something like Paul's letter or Paul's epistle to the Hebrews, or the epistle of Paul to the Hebrews. While the King James ascribes this letter to the Hebrews from Paul, earlier manuscripts did not. We don't know the name of the writer. Now, some scholars would say, well, the language isn't Paul's, the expression isn't Paul's, but some of those would say that Ephesians isn't Paul's either, and yet the language of Romans and 1 Corinthians is very different, and yet they don't have any problems ascribing that to the Apostle Paul. All this to say, whether or not you claim this is the epistle of the Apostle Paul, it's still authoritative, and the church put it in our New Testament for a reason. But some of the issues are a little bit different than what Paul is writing about, while clearly in Galatians and in other places, Paul is writing against these Judaizers who are ostensibly coming from James, but aren't really from James, to get Gentiles to follow the law, and particularly to be circumcised, which the Apostle Paul writes against this being required. And, of course, in the Acts of the Apostles, we find that it's not required either. Neither is fulfilling all the law that God gave to Moses, but there are certain things that Christians should abstain from nonetheless. Well, rather than it being an issue of Judaizers coming again and the Apostle Paul arguing against them, Hebrew is probably not, well, it may be very well a derogatory term. People wouldn't call themselves Hebrews, they'd call themselves Jews, I think. So it's possible even in this title, it's standing against what certain persons are claiming. Now, it does go on quite a bit about the priest offering sacrifice in the temple. And by the way, Hebrew is the language that what we call the Old Testament is written in. But this writer is quoting the Greek version of those scriptures. So it's probably written to those who would be Hellenists, who would be Jews who have become Christians but are of a Jewish background, or it is to those Greeks who were God-fearing and took part in the synagogue, who were very joyous at the good news of the Lord Jesus Christ, because in Paul's preaching, they're just as welcome as the Jews, and Christ has broken the barriers down. What the writer seems to be arguing against is those who have come to Christ, regardless of their background, who now are claiming to be a different sect of Jews. Now, why would they do this? And all the early followers of Jesus are Jews, right, including the Apostle Paul. Well, Judaism was tolerated by Rome, so long as Jews held to certain things, including not trying to convert anybody to Judaism. They were tolerated by Rome. But Christians were different. And as Jews are making distinctions between themselves and Christians and trying to bring about persecution of Christians because they're not Jews or shouldn't be considered Jews, Rome is not tolerant of other sects. So this is writing to those persons who might not fully claimed Christ, or having claimed Christ, might want to say, well, we're really just Jews, in order to avoid persecution. And so the writer is questioning, if you have come under God's covenant in the Lord Jesus Christ, why would you deny it and go back to something like Judaism with its temple worship, which was only temporary and not really effective? Why would you claim Christ and then deny him? It's clear that he's writing to a group of people that are not committed to the point of shedding their own blood or having their own blood shed for the cross of Christ. And if someone has come to Christ and has then fallen back into sin, how can he be part of the household anymore? Some would claim that this is saying that if you have come to Christ, then sin should never be a problem or in your life at all, because you're now living holy, righteous. It would seem to me that it's more about having claimed Christ, but when the persecution comes or you feel the threat of persecution, to fall back on Judaism and saying, no, we're just a sect of Jews and there's no difference between us and them, and thereby escaping what may be coming in the way of what Rome would do to persons who are following Christ, who have to say, no, Caesar is not Lord, Jesus is Lord. This also may be why the Apostle Paul is so bound and determined to get to Rome, because he sees heavy trials coming upon Christians. But if he can get the Roman court to understand what it is to follow the gospel of Christ and convince them, not only to convert them, but perhaps at least to understand that following Christ is no real threat to the empire, then the persecution coming might not come. So these are things that are at issue. Is the temple still practicing sacrifices at the time of this writing? I don't know that you can clearly say. It might seem to be so. The Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD because of a Jewish rebellion against Rome. So we only have the response of the writer. We don't have directly from those the writer is writing to what they are doing and what the issue is. We might be able to guess from the response. But the big lesson is, if you have received Christ, then why would you go back to something inferior and ineffective, even if it is to save your flesh, when it may be the calling of Christ to offer yourself as Christ has offered himself for us. So I hope this is of some help in dealing with this wonderfully written letter that in all likelihood is not the writing of the Apostle Paul, but still has some very important messages for us. Thank you very much.